story of Old Red. I bought an A50 when I was in high school. Paul Bean and I both bought them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I played when I was in D.C. That's what I cut Rocky Run with on the Folkway thing, was
Right.
an A50. And then I lusted after an F5. I had played some F5s. Benny Kane had two lowers that I had played when I was in D.C. And so I knew what a real mandolin sounded like.
Yeah.
And so in the late 60s, there was nobody making mandolins then. So, and the new Gibsons were just, you might as well nail two befores together. They were just so heavy, they just weren't good. So you had to find an old one.
Yeah.
And I helped a friend find a lower. Pete Kuykendall had told me the name of a guy in New York that dealt in used lowers. And so I had put a friend of mine at Burlington, in touch with him. I went to New York on business and just took the phone book and called that name until I got there. I mean, it was pages and pages of the name that I finally found. Anyway, and I would call and I'd say, let me speak to Lloyd Lower. And immediately they wouldn't know who I was talking about, so I'd hang up and call the next one. And when I finally got the right one, the guy says, why do you want to speak to him? And I said, I'm looking for one of his mandolins. You know, and then that's how
That was brilliant.
Harry West.
Oh, yeah.
Harry later moved to North Carolina.
sure.
At this time, he was in New York, right?
We're actually going to Granite Falls Fiddlers Convention.
Is he living up? He died. His wife.
He sure did.
He opened the music store.
Jeannie Wett, yeah.
Yeah.
They used to come to the Bluegrass Center sometimes back in the day, you know.
Yeah, but that was
okay.
So I knew about them, and I knew I could get a pre-war, not one from. I could get one from the 30s, a Sam Bush kind of thing, or 40s, for $300-400 that he'd take in and trade when he'd sell a lower, a used lower, you know.
Yeah.
And the lower was $1,000. I just didn't think I could fork over $1,000 with 3 kids to raise. I just thought that was too much money to spend. I didn't see it as an investment. I was not smart enough to realize that if you're seeking the top thing in the world, somebody else is going to want it too eventually, and the value will go up. So I didn't see it at that time as an investment. It had not risen drastically at that. You know, if you could get one for $1,000, that was about the price of a new mandolin. And that's what I told my friend when I got in touch with Harry West for him. Don't buy a new F5, get this old one for the same money. And so
absolutely.
that's what he did. He wound up with a lower, and I didn't have one. So I see an ad in the Greensboro Daily News. It says, for sale, German fiddle and old mandolin. I called him. And he had Old Red, and he had a late 30s A-style F-hole Gibson mandolin. Looked like an A50 almost.
Okay.
And he had a fiddle.
Yeah.
So I got Paul Bean and I said, let's ride. It was Saturday morning. We rode up the Oak Ridge up above the Greensboro Airport, that little community.
Right.
Went to his house. And before he showed us the watermelons, he went out in the garden and before he showed us the mandolins, he went out in the garden and pulled a watermelon. And we cut a watermelon and ate watermelon out of his garden. I'm just setting the tone, so you know. Yeah. And then I went inside and he had Old Red. And the back of it looked like this, except the finish was still on the neck. And the top was darker than this.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and it was obvious the finish had cracked on the neck, so I could tell that the neck had had a plug put in it.
Yeah, okay.
So they just sawed the neck into about the midpoint and made a plug and lengthened the neck so that it would take a fingerboard like an F5 and the bridge would sit in the middle of where the F-holes were on an F5.
Yeah, yeah.
Rather than with a short neck, the bridge would sit back here. So I could tell that it was a converted F4 or F2 that had a top put on it. And then I saw George Gruen at a show Monroe was playing, and I had just bought this, and George looked at it, and he said, you see this peak right here? I said, yes. He said, you see how that's two pieces of binding? I said, yes. He says, well, on the F5, it is a single piece of binding with not so sharp a point here. This is before lower. He said, this identifies the body as being before lower. Mm-hmm. After lower, that was a single piece of binding. See, I wouldn't have known that.
No, I mean, who would?
Yeah,
He's probably
and George says it was an F4 or an F2, and what a mighty waste of a wonderful instrument.
Yeah.
You know, he was against converting it,
Oh,
you
sure,
know.
sure.
So he was condemning the
Yeah.
person that had done it. But
That's right.
anyway, I brought it home, and it had something, but it didn't have it all. And I thought that the finish on the top was not firm. I could take my fingernail and it was soft feeling.
Oh, okay.
And I said, that's a wet blanket. That's just dampening out the sound.
Yeah.
So I took steel wool, 4/0 steel wool, Paul Bean and I did, and rubbed the top till I got down to the sealer or the stain, whichever you want to call it. The first thing they put on the new piece of wood. And I stopped at that because I wanted the wood to have some protection, and that seemed to be hard. So I stopped there. But it offered very little protection for the future.
Yeah.
You know, so anyway, then I reseated the bridge. They had put an F5 style bridge. I don't know where they got that bridge, but see, it has a small adjustment knurl things
Sure.
like the F5,
Yeah.
and the 4s didn't have that. So, and this was before the truss rod came out because it's a 3-piece neck. It's maple, and ebony strip turned on edge instead of a truss rod.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the guy that bought it after it was converted had Claremont Wood to take the fingerboard off and put a truss rod in it. He was afraid that neck joint wouldn't hold up, you know, with it being sawed in two. You know, they sawed the truss rod in two too when they sawed that ebony strip.
Yeah.
I mean, that's you know, so he was mechanically oriented enough to know maybe the neck's gonna need. Neck is not giving me trouble.
And who did that?
I've had this 50 years now. I got this in '68, so I've been playing this mandolin 50 years. Mm-hmm. And it's about a 1918 originally. So someone else enjoyed it for longer than I have.
That's amazing.
Well,
With the
a comparable time.
You know, my old fiddle.
It's prior to 1918. George said because it's a one-piece back that Gibson quit doing most of the one-piece backs. He said there was a few lowers that had a one-piece back, but by and large you could say it's prior to 1918 if it's a one-piece back.
Yeah.
You know, so that's sort of what I'm going on. And then there's a number written on the end block up there at the neck that I can make out the digits, and that would be a factory order number. And they sort of come and go. It's not as consistent as, serial numbers are messed up with Gibson too. But anyway, the best I can do is to put it between 1914 and 1918.
Okay.
It's about the best I can,
One, pretty much.
with what information I have.
Yeah.
You know. And George says it was an F4 or an F2, depending on whether you think that the binding on the back is original. And it's my impression that it was not original. See this joint and see this little splice in there? There's a little extra piece. I just don't think that is the way the binding would have been done by Gibson. I don't think it would have been broken right there. You understand, it's just the workmanship is not quite, but the color of it's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
You know, which means that if they did the binding for this, and they probably did the binding for that too. And I've bumped it and knocked little corners and ears off.
Oh yeah, but
Throwing it in the trash can, it'll do that. What you want to play?